Hi, my name is Mark Robbins, and if you're watching this, it's either a big mistake or you're interested in the winder. This video is meant to sort of take the place of a owner's manual, and I'm going to do the best to explain how everything works and everything you need to be successful. Thank you for watching, and thank you for your support on the winder. Alright, I want to give a quick overview of the winder as it sits here in the summer of 2020. I'm sure there's always things to do better. My highly accurate cheap scale has it come in right at 16 ounces. This is with just a standard servo on it, which we're going to talk about mounting servo, and if you use a little heavier servo with metal gear, that's going to change a little bit. And you could clean up some wires here and there too. The original version was about 1.5x this. We've trimmed down the weight pretty good. Pretty happy with this. I think it's a small penalty in your plane. General size range, I'm going to do this kind of live. So with this particular servo, which is not one don't use this as a recommendation, but right at 5 inches wide for width needed within your fuselage. Length is under 7. Let's actually say 6.5 inches long, and height wise, from whatever you may attach it to, right at about 4.5 inches. So just a quick size check to make sure it would fit in whatever you want to put it in. I'm currently running this in the Bedouil 120. We have them in Pawnees. We have them in an extra something, IMAC type plane. Most airplanes that we're towing big airplanes with, it's going to fit in just fine. I know, for example, if you kind of do a standard install on a Bedouil 120 or a Bedouil 170, you can probably move the batteries around and create the space for this really quickly. Schmielac works pretty good, kind of in the upper main cabinet. You know, if it's 6 months from now, I'll be most of the way through a Peter Goldsmith bird dog kit, so ask me then how I'm doing the winder on that. So that's a general size overview, weight overview. Let's next talk about what you need. As far as radio setup goes, you need release back from your receiver, just like you normally would, and we're going to get into release install in a little bit, but you definitely need a channel for your release, and then you need one channel to activate the winder, and we'll get into this more in depth in a little bit, but really just the two channels, and if you're replacing a standard tow release, you just need one extra to run the winder. And I will get into the specifics in that in a little bit. All right, so first up is the battery selection. I test and we've used in models that have this in production now, both 2S LiPo and 2S Life. The speed control on here is an older model speed control, and the reason I chose that was that it still would work with like nickel metal or nickel NiCad batteries. I wouldn't recommend doing that for the motor's sake, is you're going to draw a lot of current, and I wouldn't do nickel metal or NiCad. But the issue we were running into with Life was that with a more modern speed control, or one that's built more recently, it would actually do the low voltage cutoff with the Life battery. So we've remedied that both with the code on the controller, and also with the speed control selection. So this is the current version. This speed control will become hard to find, and at some point it'll be 2S LiPo only to run the setup. Now, it's completely up to you. If you decide to run your winder on your ignition battery or receiver battery, I just recommend having it a completely separate circuit. So 2S LiPo, 2S Life. In my Badul, this is the battery using my Badul. It's a 2200 2S LiPo. You could definitely get away with a little bit less for maybe a normal day of towing. I think I did 2 straight days of a lot of towing with 2200 milliamp hour battery pack, and it was just fine. You'll also need to supply tow release servo, and just a quick overview on how this looks. Hardware will be included. Servo and servo arm will not be. People have lots of opinions. I don't know if you're doing a high voltage system or more of a standard system throughout your airplane, so you're up for the servo. To install a release servo, I have just designed the frame to take on 2 zip ties to hold the servo in place. Kind of see this in this frame. Spots for the zip tie to go to. Zip tie it nice and tight. And then for servo arm, you want this reasonably in the center of the shaft exit so that this can operate smoothly. You also want to set this brass as the, connect the length of this so that it's fully engaged there, and then as it comes out, you'll set your endpoint to your servo to release where there's nothing through the shaft, so that your tow line would release. Any questions on that? If that's not clear, let me know. If you need to attach the servo a little better, a little double back tape between the frame and the servo will help it from sliding around. And also note, if I can get the angles right here, the closer you are to the center when it's fully engaged, the better your pin will be. So if I move this closer to the center, you can see it lined up nice, and you can get the loop in there easily and flip the switch. So it's good to kind of fiddle with this a little bit until you get the right one. On my just whatever servo I had laying around, this servo arm is just slightly too short, but you get the point. I just use a little bit longer servo arm and center that up right in the tube so that it's the easiest to attach when you are working inside the fuselage. Just a quick discussion on how to install this into your airplane. I've really left this up to the modeler to decide how you're going to attach it, but maybe give you some ideas here. Some folks have made a plywood bracket to purchase these aluminum standoffs, something that maybe slides in and locks down. What I have done is used aluminum angle iron, cut the holes to match the holes in the frame, and then attach this to the floor of the fuselage. Certainly another option could be to zip tie or tie the standoffs to the floor of your model. Completely up to you. I'm assuming if you are this far in this hobby, you will come up with a solution that matches your model and matches it well. I've debated on including the aluminum angle iron. The biggest issue right now is procuring this because all the hardware stores around me require mass, and I refuse to do that. So Stupid COVID. I will recommend this way as an easy way of attaching to the floor. Just take the frame apart, cut these holes through the aluminum, and then screw it appropriately into your model. I use blind nuts on the bottom of the floor of my Bedoul to capture that part. Other install items to consider when you're completely ready to install this finally in your model. I would recommend taking all these screws out and hitting them with Loctite. I'm going to make some assumptions that you're going to take this apart when you receive it, and either utilize the aluminum to attach it or figure out a way to attach it to your model somehow. But either way, let's Loctite all the screws. We also want to make sure that the motor has some adjustment here for tension on the belt, and I like to see, you know, a little bit of deflection. These teeth have a pretty good grip, and so I've never really had one slip. So generally in the middle is fine for the motor and belt tension, but something to pay attention to. These clamps clamp across the shaft of the motor, and you just want to make sure that they're reasonably tight, that they don't spin against each other in any way. Alright, let's get into how this works. Apologize for the video quality. I'm not going to become a professional YouTuber for sure. So I want to give a quick overview kind of on how exactly this works. There's an ESC that is ran by this Nano, and this controller tells the ESC to go. It then monitors the amperage going through the motor, and then at some point when the motor stops, the amperage spikes, and then it tells the speed control to go back to 0 and then wait. The other factor that's happening on this controller is it's receiving information from your receiver. Doesn't matter brand receiver at all. The threshold is 1600 PWM, but in general, if you have any receiver outputting on a switch, you can do high and low. High would say, okay, go ahead and run, and low would be in the sort of reset stage. So I'm going to demonstrate this in a couple different ways. I want to point out that there is no power connection to this control board through the receiver. So even though there is a red wire for the sake of having good strain relief to the board, this particular pin is generally dead to the rest of the board. This system receives power through the ESC, I should say the BEC on the ESC. Those are all TLAs, 3-letter acronyms. So you must have the battery connected that you plan to use to run the motor and winder setup for any of this to operate. There is a common ground for good electronic practices back to your receiver, and then obviously a signal wire is the most important. For this setup here, I'm just using a 2S Life to drive a servo exerciser that's simply going to say high or low. I'm going to talk over the winder. Hopefully the audio picks up pretty good on that. So I'm going to demonstrate kind of what happens here. First thing I'm going to do is make this switch go to high, and I'm going to go ahead and leave it as to act as a 2-position switch that you might use on your transmitter. Obviously it's up to you, the modeler, on what where you're going to put this on your radio, and I can show my examples here in a little bit. But I'm going to make this go to high, and then the winder's going to run. I'm going to pinch the drum to simulate some sort of stoppage. Typically when the line is all the way in, it'll stop on the fuselage, and then it'll cut out, and then we'll talk some more. So it's running, winding in. And I put a little load to it. The winder stops, and it's ready to go. Now you can still see that my switch is still high or above halfway. It's not going to activate or run again until the switch goes back to low, and then it would have to return to high to run again. Now the reason I've done this, excuse me one second, is to allow for the use of, say this is your switch to activate the winder. Okay, high is go, it would be winding in, and then it stops all on its own, and then to reactivate it again, you bring the switch back to low and then back to high. The way I actually use this is on a momentary switch. So I'm going to demonstrate what that looks like. I'm going to go to high on the servo exerciser, and then I'm going to return to low, and you'll see that the winder keeps going until it hits its cutoff. So we'll demonstrate that real quick. High, low, and then it's immediately ready to go again. So basically what we just did was the high, and it really doesn't matter how long you hold this or not, as long as it's just a few milliseconds of on time, it'll initiate the run. So what I do when I'm towing is the glider is off now. My flaps, I like everything proportional, so my flaps are onto my slider here. So everything is here on a normal tow operation. On the far left hand side is my release to dump somebody if we had to, emergency. So basically I am going to come to almost idle. I'm going to pull my flaps all the way down, and then I'm going to hit this, and my transmitter is going to say Towline retracts, just as a feedback that I've done this, and it's going to wind in, and typically at 1,000-foot tow it's all the way in about halfway down, and so it's good to go. Now let's say you were flying back to Earth really quickly, and the tow line whips and creates enough backlash, or it catches on something, or you had a bad release and had a ball of the tow line catch on about halfway in. You could hit that switch as many times as you want to reinitiate a wind. So it's I can only do it sometimes when I'm trying really hard to make the tail coming from the tail of line whip really hard to make this stop enough to stop. Again, when I'm really trying, I can only be successful every once in a while. Usually it's going to overpower that until it gets to a good firm stop. Now I'm going to demonstrate this one more time. I do want to show this this LED real quick. This is on all the time, just so you know that there's power to the system. But when it is winding, it flashes. And I'm going to just demonstrate that real quick. Make the switch go to high, and then I'll stop it, and you'll see this flash, and then we'll explain that. See, the switch is flashing, or the LED is flashing. We'll stop it, and then it goes back to solid on. Now, if you had a very low battery and it got to the low cutoff, or something failed, there's still a amp cutoff within the ESC. And so if you were to see this is still flashing and not in a solid state, but this is not winding, you know it's actually the ESC that cut it out and not the control board. And that's really just used for troubleshooting, as troubleshooting is always in the back of the book, right? But that is an option. I also have an LED mounted on the outside of my plane because as we're doing developing, we use the LED for a couple different things. And on the board, here's a half-done board, for example. On the board, there is a place to solder up 2 wires to run to a remote LED. So if you wish to do that, go ahead and do that. The square pad is the ground. The other pad is the positive end of the LED. And there is already a resistor in line. So go ahead and wire these 2 wires directly to whatever LED you'd like to put on the outside of your plane. and it will run at the appropriate voltage for the system. I hope that all makes sense on operation. Super simple. I wanted to make one of my things in life is complexity rolled up into something simple. At the end of the day, I want to wind. It's just a click, and I want it to decide to stop. Go ahead and stop when there is an issue. Other folks have done manual switch on the outside of their airplane for this circuit. I use a little different style. The jet guys use a pin flag that lights up all the circuits in my plane all at once. So I actually separate this circuit out, but use one switch on the outside of my Badul for towing. I hope that makes sense on the operation, and everything should work pretty smooth if you have a grasp of all that. Okay, I want to talk through just a couple troubleshooting items and address something else I forgot. This control board really could be mounted anywhere, so if it's more appropriate to mount it in your fuse somewhere, go for it. It doesn't really have to be on here. And if you're running into size constraints, and try to keep everything connected and talk at the same time, go ahead and cut this board, not the board, but the phenolic frame, short up to, or reasonably up to, this back standoff. This would allow maybe batteries to be put underneath this or so forth. So this back is really just a holder for the control board, and you can decide as a modeler what to do with that. That's easy enough. Okay, so on to some troubleshooting. It is important to remember that at the end of the day, this is just giving the ESC a command to say go, and then it's giving the ESC a command to say stop, and then all of the logic is done within this board. So that being said, the troubleshooting within this ESC, I'll show my computer here for a second. If you are hearing beeping after during a tow session, in general, I just ignore it because sometimes it happens when you're in real production, and I'm not really concerned at all. So 2 beeps on this particular ESC, and you can look this up yourself too if you want, is a low voltage cutoff. Batteries are 2 discharge, 3 beeps and flashes over current. 4 beeps and flashes is written on this particular ESC, and what they call it is motor anomaly. Controller encountered abnormal behavior such as a prop strike or other physical interference. Guess what? That's exactly what we're doing, is a prop strike with this particular motor. So when this happens, it runs normal, it just beeps, and that's I did a circuit with a reset within the power of this device, and it met the level of complexity that I didn't like, and I'd just rather have it beep every once in a while. Sometimes I go a tow session at 20 some tows and it never beeps, and other times it beeps. But obviously, if the ESC realizes that this is stopped, typically a really abrupt stop, it will hit that 4 flashes, beeps and flashes, and it's really just an indicator to say, hey, that happened, but it actually still runs the next time you flip the switch and run it. So if you hear it beeping, you know, those are things to consider, and I'm not too worried. As we touched on before, if you see this flashing but this not running, 99% of the time, complete reboot, in other words, unplugging the system battery, plugging it back in, will fix that. But probably the number one reason that happened is this battery is too low. We do have a voltage cutoff within the ESC that could happen with. That, I think, concludes the troubleshooting. It's really straightforward, and feel free to reach out if you discover any other issues. But we've been been very successful with this. Also, troubleshooting wise, there is a reset button on this nano board, and if you tied this in somehow, see I've got a zip tie in here, but if you I wrapped one of them with tape and it held the reset button down, and as you can see, things aren't happy when the reset button is being held down. So make sure this is free and clear. For future reasons, I haven't, oh there we go, see we're beeping because it didn't like the state when I did the reset. That's what it sounds like when it finds an anomaly. And I would just completely ignore it. In fact, for fun, live, we'll do a test. Still runs, still stops, still runs normal. It's not going to stop beeping until we power cycle. I do want to get through the last little bit of troubleshooting. There is a header on the board. Let's go to this one. To program the ESC. If we ever run into a reason to program the ESC is soldered directly to the board. It'd be really difficult to get a program. So I put this program header on there. In general, you'll never have to need that if it just runs. But if we discover something that we can try to fix, there's an option there. But I do want to point out that if you were to short any of these three together, things probably won't be happy with the speed control, since this goes straight to the ESC. So keep that in mind. That this is free and clear if you're having issues, or that this reset is not pushed. All right, I want to briefly discuss Towline real quick. These are some tow lines that I've made up and used, and I am using just a very cheap birdie for a badminton set. I think they're $2 for 6 of them at my Walmart. And I like these because they really tend to fly behind the airplane and over the tail really nice, and they provide a good solid but rubber stopper for the fuselage. And as you'll be able to see on the fuselage itself, in my Badul example, it runs in really nice. Other things that we've tried and tested is another setup here with just a wiffle ball. I think that works fine too. It just seems to fly a little lower, and so as you wind all the way in, it doesn't seem like it flies quite so good. Sometimes it hits the tail, which is actually no problem because this is designed to stop when there's some sort of pullback right on the line. So it's never been an issue. Every once in a while, I would say 5 to 10% of the time when I'm towing, the birdie just happened to be flying over when I was maybe on the up elevator or something like that, and it'll stop further back towards the tail. But I still have tow line that's not being drug on the ground, and so I'm perfectly happy with that. It's up to the modeler. I utilize a weak link on my tow plane end of things, and I'm going to demonstrate hookup and how that looks on the Badul, but this is up to you. And I do like to have a swivel on both ends so that the tow line doesn't make a mess of itself. 100 feet of tow line, or maybe just short after a couple knots, fit perfect on the drum. So that's what we run. Okay, quick video to show the exit out of the fuselage. This is my Badul 120. As you can see, I've used 2 of these aluminum guides to guide the tow line into the fuse, and you want to be as straight as you can within reason, so that the tow line will exit in a manner in which it's not passing through a lot of binding points and causing you issues. Okay, more voiceover of old videos since the weather's not cooperating. Now that you've got everything installed and you're happy with the way the Towline exits the fuselage, and you've got wear points on the airplane installed, it's time to go ahead and test a wind on the ground. And you see, as I'm doing here, I'm just letting it drag on the ground and not allowing the winder to get snagged anything, hopefully on the way by. It's going to definitely wind better in the air than it ever will on the ground. So that's just a key thing to keep in mind. And should wind all the way in with success. Hey, thanks for watching. This means you made it all the way to the end of the video, and thank you for putting up with my poor speech through the mostly one-take wonders, making this whole winder. Lots of ahs and ums. So thank you very much for bearing with me. Hopefully it answers all your questions, but I'm very interested in helping you be successful with this. I didn't build it to sell it. I built it for my own sake, and then friends wanted it and kind of expounded from there. And so if you are wildly successful, please let me know. I'm pretty invested into this project. Been a long time in the works and prototyping. Thanks a lot. Reach out, email below, and I can help you with any questions you have.